They thought Roman Reigns was finished forever. WWE executives, wrestling media, and even his own family had written off the tribal chief after the devastating injuries he suffered during his conspiracy-fueled near-death experience, believing that the damage to his spine, his organs, and his spirit was too severe for any possible comeback. But last night on Monday Night Raw, in the most shocking return in wrestling history, Roman Reigns didn't walk back through those curtains. He was brought back in an ambulance driven by CM Punk and AJ Lee, two people who should hate him more than anyone else in the wrestling world. What you're about to discover about why these former enemies risked everything to save Roman's life will make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, redemption, and the dark forces that nearly destroyed wrestling's biggest star. The moment that changed everything happened at exactly 11:47 p.m. during what was supposed to be Seth Rollins and Brock Lesnar's victory celebration over the Vision's successful destruction of the Bloodline. These two architects of Roman's downfall were standing in that ring, gloating about how their months-long conspiracy had finally eliminated WWE's most dominant champion, when the sound of sirens began echoing through the arena. At first, everyone thought it was just another ambulance angle, one eyewitness later recalled. WWE has used medical emergency storylines so many times that the crowd was expecting some routine dramatic entrance. Nobody was prepared for what actually happened when that ambulance backed up to the loading dock. But this wasn't a storyline ambulance filled with actors and predetermined drama. This was a real emergency medical vehicle that had been stolen from Chicago General Hospital by two people who had discovered something so horrifying about Roman's condition that they couldn't wait for official channels or corporate approval to take action. The first shock was seeing CM Punk behind the wheel, another witness observed with obvious awe. The man who had been banned from WWE, blacklisted from the industry, and written off as a bitter has-been was driving an ambulance into the arena like some kind of avenging angel. But the real surprise came when AJ Lee emerged from the passenger seat, her face grim with determination that made everyone understand this wasn't about old grudges or personal vendettas. This was about something far more serious and immediate. AJ looked terrified, a ringside observer noted. Not scared for herself, but terrified about what was in the back of that ambulance and what would happen if they didn't get Roman to that ring immediately. What happened next sent shockwaves through the wrestling world and exposed the most sickening cover-up in sports entertainment history. CM Punk and AJ Lee opened the back doors of that stolen ambulance to reveal Roman Reigns in a condition so shocking, so obviously the result of systematic torture rather than medical treatment, that several people in the audience began vomiting at the sight. Roman looked like a prisoner of war, one witness described with horror. Emaciated, covered in unexplained injuries, hooked up to machines that seemed designed to keep him weak rather than help him recover. This wasn't medical care, this was systematic torture disguised as treatment. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Roman's condition was the evidence of ongoing medical manipulation that CM Punk and AJ Lee had discovered during their investigation into his mysterious disappearance from public view. Roman had been drugged for months, CM Punk announced into a wireless microphone as he helped remove his former enemy from the ambulance. Not treated, not healing, not recovering, systematically poisoned to keep him unconscious and prevent him from exposing the conspiracy that nearly killed him. The revelation that Roman had been kept in an artificially induced coma to prevent his testimony about the assassination attempt sent shockwaves through the arena and exposed WWE's medical conspiracy as ongoing criminal enterprise rather than isolated incident. They weren't trying to help him recover, AJ Lee added with controlled fury as she monitored Roman's vital signs. They were trying to keep him quiet permanently, using medical manipulation to eliminate the one witness who could expose the truth about corporate-sponsored attempted murder. But CM Punk's investigation into Roman's condition had uncovered something even more disturbing than medical imprisonment. He had discovered that WWE executives had been actively preventing Roman's family from visiting him while spreading false information about his recovery progress. Roman's wife thinks he's been in a medically induced coma for his own protection, Punk revealed with obvious anger. His children have been told that daddy is too sick to see them, that visits might hurt his recovery. Meanwhile, he's been conscious and calling for his family while being told that they've abandoned him. The psychological warfare that had been conducted against Roman during his medical imprisonment represented cruelty that transcended corporate conspiracy and entered the realm of systematic torture designed to break his spirit as well as his body. They were trying to convince Roman that his family had given up on him, AJ added with tears in her eyes. Making him believe that his wife had moved on, that his children didn't want to see him, that the bloodline had forgotten about him while he suffered alone. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came when CM Punk announced how he and AJ had discovered Roman's true condition and the ongoing conspiracy to keep him imprisoned under the guise of medical care. "We broke into the facility," Punk admitted with no shame whatsoever. AJ used her medical training to infiltrate the staff, I used my investigative skills to access the records, and together we uncovered a medical conspiracy that makes everything we thought we knew about Roman's injuries look like amateur hour. The criminal methods that Punk and AJ had used to rescue Roman were justified by what they had discovered, systematic medical abuse that had transformed Roman from recovering patient into permanent prisoner of corporate interests. Roman was being kept alive but unconscious, AJ explained with clinical precision. fed drugs that prevented natural healing, subjected to procedures that caused additional damage, monitored by medical staff who were reporting to WWE executives rather than focusing on patient care. But the medical records that Punk and AJ had stolen during their rescue mission contained evidence that went far beyond Roman's individual case to expose systematic abuse of multiple wrestlers who had been deemed problematic by corporate interests. Roman wasn't the only one, Punk announced, his words sending shockwaves through the wrestling industry. We found records of at least 12 other wrestlers who had been subjected to similar medical manipulation, kept unconscious or impaired to prevent them from exposing corporate crimes or demanding fair treatment. The systematic use of medical facilities as corporate prisons for troublesome wrestlers revealed a level of institutional evil that transformed WWE from entertainment company into criminal organization willing to torture their own employees to maintain control. Daniel Bryan, Dean Ambrose, several others who mysteriously disappeared or suffered convenient medical setbacks. AJ continued the devastating list. All of them were subjected to medical manipulation designed to eliminate them as threats to corporate control. But standing in that ring, with Roman Reigns slowly regaining consciousness after months of forced sedation, CM Punk delivered the most explosive revelation of his investigation. WWE didn't just try to kill Roman once, Punk announced with fury that made everyone understand this was about ongoing conspiracy rather than isolated incident. They've been trying to eliminate him for over 2 years, using medical manipulation, systematic poisoning, and now medical imprisonment to achieve what direct violence couldn't accomplish. The timeline that Punk revealed showed that Roman's near-death experience in Paris had been just the most obvious attempt in a systematic campaign of elimination that had been ongoing since he began demanding creative control and fair compensation for wrestlers. Every injury Roman suffered, every health scare, every moment when he seemed weak or vulnerable, it was all manufactured, AJ added with medical authority that made her allegations impossible to dismiss. They've been systematically destroying his body while making it look like natural wear and tear from wrestling. But perhaps the most emotionally devastating revelation came when Roman finally regained enough consciousness to speak, his first words revealing the psychological torture he had endured during his medical imprisonment. "Where's my family?" Roman's voice was weak but carried the pain of someone who had been convinced that his loved ones had abandoned him during his darkest hour. "Why didn't they come to see me? Why did they give up on me?" The heartbreak in Roman's voice as he asked about the family that had been prevented from seeing him revealed the psychological dimension of WWE's medical conspiracy, designed to break his spirit as well as his body. "Your family never gave up on you," CM Punk's voice carried genuine emotion as he knelt beside Roman's stretcher. "They've been fighting to see you every day, filing lawsuits, threatening legal action, doing everything possible to reach you. WWE has been lying to everyone about your condition." But AJ Lee's medical examination of Roman in full view of the cameras revealed injuries that couldn't be explained by his original trauma or any legitimate medical treatment. "These are fresh injuries," AJ announced with clinical authority that silenced the arena. "Needle marks, bruising patterns, surgical scars that weren't present in his original medical records. Someone has been conducting unauthorized procedures on Roman while he was unconscious." The evidence of ongoing medical abuse conducted on an unconscious patient elevated WWE's conspiracy from attempted murder to systematic torture that could result in war crimes charges if conducted by government authorities. "They've been using Roman as a test subject," Punk added with horrified realization. "Experimental procedures, drug trials, surgical techniques, all conducted without consent on someone who was being kept unconscious specifically to prevent resistance." But the most shocking revelation came when Roman, despite his weakened condition, managed to speak coherently enough to expose the final piece of WWE's conspiracy. "They wanted me to sign papers." Roman's voice grew stronger with each word as the months of pharmaceutical control began wearing off. "Retirement documents, asset transfers, legal waivers giving WWE control of my name and likeness in perpetuity. They were going to keep me drugged until I signed away everything." The corporate theft that WWE had been planning while Roman was medically imprisoned revealed the ultimate goal of their conspiracy, not just his elimination from wrestling, but the seizure of his intellectual property and financial assets. They were going to forge his signature, AJ added with disgust as she reviewed medical charts that documented Roman's induced unconsciousness. "Keep him drugged just long enough to process legal documents that would give them permanent control of his career and finances." But CM Punk's investigation had uncovered something even more sinister, evidence that WWE's medical conspiracy extended beyond just Roman to include plans for similar treatment of other wrestlers who posed threats to corporate control. "They have facilities prepared," Punk announced with the authority of someone who had seen the evidence firsthand. "Medical prison camps disguised as treatment centers, staffed by doctors who prioritize corporate interests over patient welfare, designed to eliminate troublesome wrestlers through systematic abuse." The systematic preparation for medical imprisonment of multiple wrestlers revealed WWE's conspiracy as more than just anti-Roman sentiment. It was the infrastructure for corporate dictatorship that would eliminate any wrestler who demanded fair treatment or creative control. CM Punk was supposed to be next, AJ revealed with obvious emotion. His return to wrestling, his demands for creative control, his refusal to accept corporate manipulation, all of it had marked him for the same medical imprisonment that Roman suffered. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Roman, despite months of systematic weakening and psychological torture, managed to stand up in that ring with the help of his unlikely rescuers. "They tried to break me," Roman's voice carried the strength of someone who had survived the unthinkable and emerged with unshakable determination. "They tried to convince me that my family had abandoned me, that my friends had forgotten me, that my career was over and my legacy was worthless." The sight of Roman Reigns standing upright after months of medical imprisonment sent shockwaves through the arena and served notice that WWE's conspiracy had ultimately failed in its primary objective. But they made one mistake, Roman continued with growing strength. They underestimated the power of real loyalty, the kind of loyalty that makes former enemies risk everything to save someone who needed help. The acknowledgement of CM Punk and AJ Lee's heroic rescue mission elevated their actions from simple storyline development to genuine moral courage that transcended wrestling rivalries and personal grudges. "Punk and AJ saved my life," Roman declared with absolute certainty. "Not because they owed me anything, not because we were friends, but because they saw injustice and chose to fight it regardless of personal cost." But CM Punk, standing beside the man he had once considered his greatest enemy, delivered his own statement about why he had risked everything to expose WWE's medical conspiracy. "Wrestling has problems," Punk acknowledged with brutal honesty. "Corporate corruption, systematic exploitation, abusive performers who create the wealth that executives enjoy. But turning medical facilities into torture chambers crosses a line that no decent person can ignore." The moral authority that Punk demonstrated by putting principles above personal grievances provided a powerful example of how wrestling could be transformed if performers united against systematic abuse rather than allowing corporate interests to divide them. "Roman and I had our differences," Punk continued with growing passion. "But seeing him tortured by people who make money from our suffering, seeing him isolated from his family while corporate executives plan to steal his life's work, that's not wrestling politics, that's evil." But AJ Lee, whose medical training had been crucial to understanding and documenting Roman's condition, delivered perhaps the most damning assessment of WWE's medical conspiracy. "What was done to Roman violates every medical ethics standard," AJ announced with professional authority. "Informed consent, patient autonomy, basic human dignity, all sacrificed to serve corporate interests that view wrestlers as expendable assets rather than human beings." The medical professionals' condemnation of WWE's treatment of Roman provided expert validation for the criminal charges that would inevitably follow this exposure. "Federal medical authorities will be investigating this facility and everyone involved," AJ promised with the confidence of someone who understood the legal implications of what they had uncovered. "Criminal charges, medical license revocations, civil lawsuits, everyone involved in this conspiracy will face consequences." But perhaps the most significant outcome of CM Punk and AJ Lee's rescue mission was the broader message it sent about wrestler unity and the power of moral courage to overcome corporate oppression. "This is what happens when wrestlers stop fighting each other and start fighting the real enemy," Punk observed with satisfaction. "Corporate executives who view us as expendable, medical professionals who prioritize money over ethics, legal systems that protect wealth over justice." The alliance between former enemies in service of a greater moral cause provided a template for how the wrestling industry could transform itself if performers united around shared principles rather than manufactured conflicts. "Roman's rescue is just the beginning," AJ added with determination that made everyone understand this was about systematic change rather than isolated incident. "Every wrestler who has been medically manipulated, every performer who has been systematically abused, every family that has been destroyed by corporate greed, all of them deserve justice." But as Roman Reigns stood in that ring, supported by the two people who had risked everything to save him, he delivered a promise that sent shockwaves through WWE's corporate structure. "They wanted me to retire quietly," Roman's voice carried the strength of someone who had survived attempted murder and medical torture. "They wanted me to sign away my rights, abandon my family's legacy, and disappear from wrestling forever. Instead, I'm going to expose every crime, prosecute every criminal, and ensure that no other wrestler ever suffers what I endured." The declaration of war against WWE's corporate conspiracy that Roman delivered with CM Punk and AJ Lee by his side represented more than just personal revenge. It was the beginning of a systematic campaign to transform wrestling from corporate dictatorship into performer-controlled industry. "We have evidence," Punk added with the confidence of someone who had meticulously documented every aspect of the conspiracy. "Medical records, financial documents, recorded conversations, video surveillance, everything needed to prove criminal conspiracy and systematic abuse." But perhaps the most powerful image was the sight of Roman Reigns, CM Punk, and AJ Lee standing united in that ring, three people who had been positioned as enemies by corporate manipulation now working together to expose the real villains who had been destroying wrestling from within. "This is what unity looks like," Roman observed with obvious emotion. "Not corporate manufactured friendships designed to sell merchandise, but real loyalty based on shared principles and moral courage." The wrestling world had witnessed something unprecedented: the rescue of their biggest star by his former enemies, the exposure of systematic medical abuse, and the beginning of a wrestler-led revolution against corporate oppression. CM Punk and AJ Lee had brought Roman Reigns back in an ambulance, but they had brought back more than just a recovering wrestler. They had brought back hope that justice was possible, that moral courage could overcome corporate evil, and that wrestling could be saved by performers who chose principles over profit. The ambulance had delivered more than just Roman Reigns to that arena. It had delivered a message that corporate criminals would face consequences, that systematic abuse would be exposed, and that the wrestling industry was about to fundamentally transform. Everything had changed in one night, and it started with two unlikely heroes who proved that sometimes former enemies make the best allies when fighting for what's right. The rescue was complete, the evidence was documented, and the revolution had begun. WWE would never be the same, and wrestling was finally free to become what it was always meant to be: entertainment created by performers for fans, not corporate exploitation disguised as sport.